Hey guys, welcome to the Kane Audio vlog and another edition of the Ask Me Anything series. This is number 5. As always, if you like these videos, then please do like, comment, subscribe, whatever, because that means that the YouTube algorithms tend to recommend it more the more involved people are. Second of all, if you've got a question for me, then just leave it below this video and I will get to it in next week's video. So let's have a look at the comments that came in last week. I'm just going to start from the top. Med again. I have more questions. 1. How to choose studio monitors, and what's your opinion about the M Audio BX5D3? I don't know the M Audio BX5D3s. The best way to choose monitors, first of all, choose your budget. Second of all, I would either speak to other producers that have speakers of a similar budget, but I think everyone will always say that their monitor speakers are the best. I would also probably look at magazines like Future Music magazine, and possibly I think Computer Music magazine do it as well, but definitely Future Music, and well, I would say Sound on Sound, but they're probably big budget if they tend to do monitors. So yeah, Future Music definitely do like they do like a top 10 for best for budgets and stuff like that, so I would probably recommend doing that and sort of narrow it down to maybe 3, 4, 5 sets of speakers, and then find your local dealer, and they're few and far between these days depending on where you are. I know in the southwest of the UK there's a shop in Bristol. They tend to have okay stock. Otherwise, if you're in south of England, I recommend Absolute Music in Bournemouth, and of course there's a couple in London. Yeah, so if you can contact them in advance and maybe find out what stock they've got, and then get them to set you up with say 5 different sets of monitors, and then pick your favourite tracks and take them down there and have a listen to them. I mean, that's the only good way of doing it. But your studio setup is only ever as good as the weakest link in your chain. So that's that. 2, do you have an email address for demos? No, I don't. I used to, and I used to have a specific email address for promos. If you send a demo to that account now, it'll have an auto reply saying something along the lines of, I got pissed off with everybody sending me all sorts of music, and most of it was not even vaguely like the style of music I played in my DJ sets. So I prefer just going on Beatport and browsing music myself and buying what I like. So yeah, that's that. Thanks for answering all my questions from the beginning of the series. Hope someday I can make with you a collab which will make my dream come true. Cool. Collaborations are difficult with me because I'm a selfish producer, if I'm honest. So there's that to bear in mind. Next question. Casey Music. Hey Dom. Thank you very much for answering my first question. Here is another one. Does your no compressor policy also apply to sidechain compression? Do you do it with LFOs then? Okay, right, this is the last question I'm answering on compressors. Of course I use compressors for sidechain compression, although actually I don't anymore because I happen to use LFO tool by Xfer. But if I needed the side chain to be triggered by one thing that turns on and off throughout a track, then I suppose I'd use it with a compressor. the whole point of what I was saying about compressors is I don't generally use compressors, and unless I need a particular kind of pumping effect on something, which is very rare. If you want to use compressors, use compressors. If you don't want to use compressors, don't use compressors. The whole point of what I was saying is that compressors don't fix things like magic. They don't make everything sound better, and especially if you start using compressors on all your synths and all your drums and everything, then everything just becomes stupidly loud and squashed, and it just becomes muddy, to be honest. It doesn't, you know, every time you're using a compressor, you're losing that clean sound. So yeah, if you want to use them, use them. If you don't, don't. Dom Pierre, any plans for a 10+ track Dom Kane LP in 1 to 2 years time? Yes, I think it would be nice. I want to do a couple more EPs. I'd like to do a couple of EPs this year if I can. And I've already started sort of drafting bits and pieces together now for my next EP for Mau5trap. But I kind of want to make this one a little bit different, or at least have one track that's maybe I don't know, a totally different BPM, or maybe with a vocalist or something along those lines. I just want to sort of, I want to push my own skill set, I guess. If so, if you have an idea or direction in mind, oh, I kind of just said that, what would it sound like? Still in love with the Structures EP. Keep up with the great work. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm really proud of the Structures EP. I heard it myself again the other day. And yeah, and I'm proud of that. So, and I think that's kind of the thing, is when you release singles, this is my personal view anyway, when you release singles, it's just out there, it's a track, it could be cool on its own. For me, when I do an EP, I want it to kind of have something more. It needs a bit of substance, it needs to maybe tell a story of some sort, and an album or 10+ LP needs to do even more than that. So yes, I'd like to do one in the next couple of years, but I really want it to be not just 12 club tracks in a row, because I don't really see the point in doing that. You may as well release 12 singles or 3-4 EPs or whatever. Yeah. Stanky Leg. Alright, Dom, let me get to the chase. Give me your credit card information. No, I'm just kidding. I actually have a question. Who was the vocals on Glitched Out? Jesus, Glitched Out is an old track. I did, man, when was that? 2005? And it did very well. It was my mate Ollie was on the chorus vocals. Big shout out to Ollie. And yeah, that track was one of those ones that sort of just was me messing around with a saw wave bass line and literally just pressing a couple of notes, and then it just kind of all fell together, and my mate Ollie came over, and he literally, while I was making the track, he was behind me making a coffee or something, and he started humming the vocals. And I was like, dude, do that again. And we literally just got the microphone and just recorded it there and then. And then another mate of mine, Hugo, who was a freestyle rapper at the time and into the hip hop thing, and he then came over a few days later and sort of gave me the sort of the hooks. Yeah, and it just kind of fell together, I suppose. So yeah, that was that. Happy accident, I suppose. Andy Ruiz. Hey Dom, thanks for answering my question. These AMAs are so fun. I would like to ask, have you ever had any kind of like full-on beef with another artist that you can talk about? Like maybe you let it be known you had an issue with them, or they had an issue with you. Not really. I mean, I've probably called a few people out for being dicks, but no more so than I would have an artist or a friend or a stranger in the street, to be honest. I don't I certainly wouldn't want any beef to go public if I had any, but I don't really have beef with people generally. Yeah, I can't think of an argument I've ever really had, other than, you know, if someone's being an idiot and talking about homeopathy or some bullshit fairy magic, then I might call them out on that and ask for some evidence. But even then, it's not beef, it's just factual. Have you ever have you had any plans for merchandise? I know it probably isn't the most pertinent thing, but man, would I love to be able to walk around town in maybe a little Structures shirt or maybe a little Kane Audio stuff. I should probably do that. Yeah, I used to have some Dom Kane merch, and then I think I changed my logo like a year or two later, so I took the merch down and I haven't bothered since. Yeah, I probably should do some Kane Audio things. I did have, where have they gone? And they're not here. I did have some Kane Audio USB pen drives and some Kane Audio pens, but I can't see any around now. They're around somewhere. Yeah, I wouldn't mind getting some actually, so yeah, I'll look into that. I don't know, in fact, anyone watching this video, you tell me what you want. Do you want t-shirts, hoodies, mouse mats, USB pens? I don't know, what is there? But yeah, that would be cool. That would be awesome actually, to have a bit of a clan. I always kind of assume that no one's going to be really that interested, to be honest. So yeah. Next question, can I ask what your tattoo is on your left arm? Yeah, I can see little glimpses of it sometimes. I don't know if I did that in front of camera. Yeah, just curious. It's one I got when I was 18. It's music related. When I was 18, I was big into this sort of hard dance scene. And when was that? 1999-ish, and going into 2000. So I ended up doing some work for a sub branch of a label, and I was a fanatic of the whole sort of branch of Media Records basically. And so there was Nuclears, BXR, Media, and a couple of others under that branch. So yeah, so it was all sort of part of that basically. Lucky for me, and this is advice to anyone who's thinking of getting like a music related tattoo, lucky for me, the label went bust probably 2 or 3 years later, and they were sort of at their peak of doing techno. So that logo doesn't get seen anymore, and I kind of picked their least used. It wasn't on the big covers of records or whatever, it was the sort of the more subtle logo. Yeah, so my advice to anyone, the one thing I've learned since, if you're going to get a tattoo that's sort of music related, get something that maybe either the artist is dead already and can't do any wrong, or the company has gone bust or something. And yeah, because it was only like 10 years later where I thought, hang on, what if that label suddenly started doing really cheesy pop that I didn't like, or R&B or something like that? It could have been horrific, but whatever. Sid Jacobs, hi Dom, any tips on arrangement of a track? I keep coming up with good 16-bar loops, but when it comes to converting that into a full track, I struggle. Also, how to do interesting transitions. Well, I think transitions and arrangement are kind of one and the same thing, because it's your transitions that dictate the arrangement, and your arrangement requires transitions. So you're saying you come up with like a 16-bar loop. I I tend to kind of write, I've noticed recently, in fact, I'm writing my tracks almost in two halves, where I've got the main chord structure and the synths and everything sort of working together, and then I'll kind of separately somewhere else in the arrangement come up with some sort of beats and a groove and a bass line, and obviously in the same key, and I'll somehow try and merge those together. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, so I'm not really recommending it. But I find that then it's the most important part of your track becomes the transitions. How do you get from one part to another? And you'll notice with a lot of my tracks, there's almost like a verse chorus in melodies or no melodies or whatever. So I think it's a tricky one on getting arrangements. Clearly, if you're doing music that's going to be used by DJs, you need a 1-minute intro or whatever, where it's mostly just beats and maybe some bass line. And yeah, I don't know. I guess you need to sit back and listen to it, pretending it's the first time you've heard it, and you need to ask yourself, where was I expecting this track to go? If you've put together you know, you're 2 minutes into the track, do you feel that it now needs even more energy, or does it need a break of energy, and that's where your breakdown comes in? It's using interesting transitions that create that. How to do interesting transitions? Good question. I try and avoid white noise sweeps. Well, these days anyway, because I think everyone does them, and as a producer I just find them a bit boring because I've done them a million times before. Something I quite enjoy doing is using silence. You'll notice again in the last couple of years I did a DTLA remix, which I was really proud of the transitions in that, because I think it's the breakdown at the peak of it where the drop is. I actually just make everything disappear for I think 1 beat or maybe 2 beats if I remember rightly, and there's just silence in there, and that makes it an awkward transition because it's just throwing a curveball in there. So sometimes using silence can be your friend, and maybe sometimes it's better to kind of not overthink it really. So yeah, I'll probably do a couple of videos on different transitions and maybe some transition techniques at some point. It'd probably be quite good. Nathan Zasirinskis. Hey Dom, a couple for you here. One, you keep saying you like nerding out over synths. How come you've got no Euro rack system, or Euro crack as it's more commonly known, because it is just the crack meth of synths, and that's exactly why I don't have them. Surely that's the holy grail of all synth nerds. Yeah, kind of, but it's also the downfall of a lot of professional producers, because you end up in this world of noise, and sometimes it's quite difficult to separate noise from music. So yeah, I've always sort of held back from getting any Euro rack stuff, although that might be subject to change because I have been eyeing up some semi-modular stuff recently. I think with Euro rack, I've lost a lot of friends to Euro rack. It's the heroin of synthesizers. They'll buy 19-inch rack, a 5, 10, 12, whatever unit rack, and I won't see them for a year because they're going to be spending all their money on filling that rack up, and they're just going to be lost in a world of patches in a dark room, and they forget to make music. So that's why I haven't done it. 2, is that the right one? Yeah, 2. In one of your earlier AMAs you suggested to always keep experimenting when making music. How do you keep such a fresh approach and not just fall into a routine? Is it just a case of putting a random effect on something and seeing what happens, then keeping it or discarding it? Yeah, kind of. And actually, sometimes you do just fall into a routine. sometimes I can find myself, you know, I want to build a track. I've maybe developed a melody quite quickly, and I obviously need to put some beats on it, and I'll grab whatever I was working on maybe the day before or whatever my other release was, and I'll just drop the beats on that temporarily, and then I'll end up going, oh shit, I need to replace these beats because they can't be the same as the last track. But it then gets difficult to actually find the inspiration to replace those. With great difficulty is the answer to find a fresh approach. I think what I try to do these days is I will usually, I think I've probably mentioned it before, like with the Moogs, I don't save my patches or presets or anything. I tend to start from scratch on every track, and I try to do that with most things. So for example, I use Sonic Academy's Kick 2 to create my kick drums, but again, I won't save those kick drums, so a lot of my kicks will sound very similar, but they won't be exactly the same in every track because I don't save it as a preset. I just start from scratch again each time, and I kind of know what I want and what I'm looking for, so it's not too difficult. So yeah, I think that's probably the best way of sort of trying to keep things fresh, is that if you don't save your presets, you don't go back to them all the time. And even if you want to make the same sound, it'll still be slightly different, and you might come across some happy accidents. And yeah, that's probably the best way of doing it. GG11, hi Dom, what's your opinion about Flume or Madian? Good, very good producers. Yeah, I like listening to it. I've never tried producing that sort of stuff. I don't think I could, if I'm honest. I don't think I'm good enough. Had you met Avicii? Also, is Ministry of Sound considered a big dance label? Ministry of Sound was considered one of the biggest dance labels. Is definitely one of the biggest nightclub brands. I don't know if it is so much a big record label these days. Had you met Avicii? No, I hadn't. But obviously, you know, his death is very sad. Yeah, I've not really got much to say on that. I've kind of not mentioned anything because I didn't really know the guy, but I know a lot of people who've met him and his management, and I know there was a lot of gossip and rumours and whatever floating around constantly, and it's none of my business. Simple as that. I think it's sad when anybody takes their own life, you know, and you have to ask yourself what led to that, and were there signs that people could have seen. And I think as DJs and producers and public facing people, we need to sort of take on a bit of responsibility there. And I think, you know, men in general need to start talking about mental health issues, and they need to start being a bit more open about the fact that it's all right to be sad or pissed off or angry or upset for no reason. That's human nature, and it's about time we started fucking talking about that, to be honest. So yeah, Joint Dust. So a question from me. What about acoustic treatment? Did you do it yourself or hired special people that know all the scientific stuff to make it? So I've previously mentioned I did my my degree was an engineering degree, maths, physics, audio based, so I kind of had most of the knowledge but needed to look it up and research it a bit extra. I will also say the guys, so all this treatment you can see in the corner and on the walls is from GIC Acoustics. Where I am right now is an industrial estate unit, and it was basically a storage unit amongst an industrial estate. And so I've built all the internal walls and ceiling and flooring and whatever. I did it all myself single-handedly with a lot of pain and tears. So I designed the walls to be a certain thickness and density to absorb certain frequencies, and I designed certain angles within the walls so no two walls are actually perfectly perpendicular. I did have a little bit of help from the guys at GIC Acoustics in choosing the right treatment. I also have a test mic, and I used some free software called Room EQ Wizard. So on that you can basically set up a microphone where the ears are, and you calibrate it to your sound card. It'll send out some noise signals, and then it'll listen through the microphone, and it'll pick up where the resonances are and blah blah blah. So yeah, it was a lot of trial and error, and it was a lot of research before I put it all together. Just generally a lot of hard work, but worthwhile, because when you get a decent sounding room, then you can start trusting your monitors, start trusting your audio interface, and start trusting your equipment more, which can help your ears develop better skills. So yeah, it's something I highly recommend. Is if you're ever going to build your own studio, get professionals to do it, or do your own research, but do a lot of research. But also be careful on the internet, because man, there are a lot of people arguing about the most minuscule of things. You know, they'll argue about which kind of rock wool is the best, and they're forgetting the fact that no two rooms are exactly the same, no two walls are exactly identical, and you know, there's a lot of people arguing over a lot of small numbers, so be careful of that. Where was I there? Acoustic treatment. So yeah, I didn't hire anyone to do it, although I did have a bit of help from the guys at Gick Acoustics. And a massive thank you to them for that. Then I can see there's a couple of replies. This was going to be my question. This is Jake Boyce. I have a pair of Sennheiser HD 650s, but I'm just not a headphone person. I enjoy producing much more through my studio monitors, but when it comes to mixing and mastering, I struggle due to my lack of acoustic treatment. Yeah, well, there's a couple of things you can do there. First of all, hire a professional to do your mix and master. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, at the end of the day, you can only work with what you've got, and if you don't have the right room or the right acoustic treatment, then you need someone to help somewhere. Working on headphones, I've discussed before, it's something I can't do myself. I have a lot of respect for guys that can, but it's not something I can do. And you know, going back to the acoustic treatment thing, you know, I would say a well-treated room, having built this room from scratch and having now heard my system in this room, I can pretty much say that actually having a good sounding room is almost more important than any equipment you put in there. You know, it makes a hell of a difference. I've done a ton of research on it, so I'm starting to understand what I'll need, but it would be awesome to hear your recommendations on where to start and what companies you recommend, or if it's worth building my own traps, diffusers, etc. on my own. If you can build your own traps and diffusers, it's not rocket science. You know, there's plenty of like DIY tutorial stuff online, and to be honest, you probably save a lot of money doing that. So if you're on a tight budget, yeah, build your own. The only thing I would say is that it's kind of definitely get the Room EQ Wizard software, and a test mic if you can, although a good quality mic, I would say sort of something like maybe a Rode NT1A, something like that, you know, that caliber and above, I suppose, or better still, a test mic. I think you can get a test mic. I think Behringer, whatever you want to call them, do a test mic, and I'm sure I've seen them on eBay for like 50 quid. They're not hugely expensive, and you can always stick it back on eBay after you've built your room. So yeah, I would definitely start with that. Find out where your bad frequencies are. And yeah, by all means build your own diffusers. I'll be back in a second because my camera is about to hit 30 minutes and switch itself off. And I'm back. So yeah, in terms of where to start in acoustic treatment, it's really difficult to judge because it depends on the size and the shape of your room, and no two rooms are the same. But essentially, you know, the basic rules are your monitors, speakers, and your ears need to form an equilateral triangle. It's depending on your monitor speakers, it's usually best to not have them pushed right up against the wall. I'm not sure if you can see the gap on mine, but there's probably a foot gap between the walls and the speakers. Another trick is to get yourself a little mirror, hold it up against, or get a friend to hold it up against the wall while you sit in your production position, and move the mirror along the walls, and at any point you can see the speaker in the walls, in the mirror, sorry, is a reflection point of sound. So that's where you need to put some acoustic treatment, which is why you'll see exactly parallel with my ear, you can see there's a big panel there. It's because the speaker audio will bounce straight off that, and again directly in front, and again directly behind the speakers. They're the obvious points. Resonance points you'll have in corners of rooms, so things like bass traps, you can see huge floor to ceiling bass traps there. I've also got a big bass trap in the middle of the wall behind me, which will also act as a bit of a diffuser for any high frequencies, but also absorb the lower frequencies, which means that I'm going to get less standing waves in the middle of the room. Yeah, it's kind of a trial and error, if I'm honest, and it's a bit of a tricky one. You can do all the research you can, but you'll, like I say, you know, you'll find, you know, you can do all the research in the world, and then when it comes to actually building your room, none of it works. Joint Dust again in response to that. 2 cents from me. I was going crazy about all this acoustic treatment problem. I even changed my Eve SC207 for smaller Genelec 8020s because the room is small and I was hearing the room, not my Eves. But I still had a problem. Ran a test tone, why the fuck I didn't do that earlier, and found out that I had a very loud resonance at 130 Hertz. Yeah, it's quite common around 120 to 140. Because if you think of the actual physical wave coming out, oh, I've got a sub under the table, and if you think of the size of you know, 130 Hertz wave, let's say, is probably about that big, and in which case, if that's a perfect multiple of your room, then it means the wave will come out the speakers, hit the wall, bounce back, and hit the exact same standing point, which is why if you add one perfect sine wave on top of another perfect sine wave, it'll be twice as loud. So that's the resonance point that you're talking about there. Now I just drop an EQ on the master bus with tamed 130 Hertz. Was gonna try Arc 2 from IK Multimedia out. I don't know what that means. And yeah, I have HD 650, but working headphones is a pain. Yeah, so you can drop an EQ on the master bus. It's not ideal because so I have a graphic equalizer that also does like room equalization, and you can automate that as well. You can calibrate everything up much like that room EQ wizard, but it's like a reactive equalizer, and I don't use any of those features for the simple reason that I don't trust it. I don't want it to do something that I'm not aware of. So I guess if you're manually doing it with an EQ, not so bad. But what I would probably be more inclined to do is just find a material that absorbs that 130 Hertz, you know, and that can usually be a fairly simple bass trap behind you. That can usually do it. The other thing I found as well when I was setting this studio up, I was actually going to be facing the wall that you're nearest. and I was going to be facing that direction when I built the place. And I set everything up, set up the speakers, and it just wasn't quite working. Moved the speakers to be against this wall, and everything suddenly worked perfectly. So that's another thing, is you'll find that sometimes, and again with that 130 hertz resonance point, sometimes moving your speakers away from the wall or closer to the wall, or maybe slightly closer together, that probably won't affect it too much, but certainly bring them out into the room or closer to the wall might help you on that, because it's like you're changing the dimensions of your back wall. Basically, you're bringing your back wall closer. Anyway, we're well over the 30 minutes, so I'm going to hurry up. I can see there's 2 more questions on this, so I'm just going to go through them. Hey Dom, I'm really thankful for you doing these. I learn a lot from them. This is Suresh Manuama. And my question is, how can I get my songs to be more dynamic and loud at the same time, like Structures EP, which is just amazing, by the way. Thank you very much. Or like See Ya by Deadmau5. It's kind of a tricky one. I spent a lot of time on the Structures EP. First of all, you have to be very careful with the sounds you choose right from the very beginning. They need to be clean sounds from the start. And you need to make sure that there's no sort of muddiness, make sure none of your kick drums are sort of infringing on that 300 hertz muddy sort of area. Any sort of hi-hats, snares, claps, stick them through a high pass filter, and scoop up, well, let's say a clap or a snare. You know, you don't expect them to have mid-range energy, but generally they do, and you'd be surprised by how much sometimes. If you stick a high pass filter on a clap or a snare, maybe scoop up to 500, 600, 700, 800 hertz. I mean, if it's a clap, then maybe up to 1K, maybe 1.5K. And you'd be surprised how much cleaner and crisper things can start coming through then. Another little trick with claps and snares again is offset them against your kick drums very slightly. So when you drop a clap, for example, and you drop it on top of kick 2 and 4 in your track, zoom right in and just nudge them over slightly before the kicks, only ever so slightly. I mean, we're talking fractions of a second, but what that's doing is, because a kick will always have a big sharp transient, and a clap has a sharp transient, and if you're adding those 2 transients together and they're playing at exactly the same time, that kick and clap is essentially twice as loud. So a way of sort of bypassing that is just to shift the transients of your claps to be slightly before the kick, so when you're listening to the track you can't notice that they're not perfectly in sync, but it means that digitally any compressors, any mastering, any mix processes that are going on, they're not having to double their efforts during that fraction of a moment. So yeah, that's a little trick. Other than that, it's just a case of choosing sounds carefully and then spending a lot of time on the mix and making sure that every time you introduce a new sound, you know, bring all the levels down, introduce a new sound from you start with your kicks and your bass, make sure they're interacting perfectly with each other, and then start bringing in maybe the other percussion or whatever, and just make sure that every time you introduce a new sound, it complements the rest. And I guess that's the only way I do it, really. What does a beginner producer must focus on first when starting up? And again, thank you very much. I'm not sure what you mean by what they should focus on, musically or equipment or what. I guess there isn't any one thing, because the truth is everything. You know, pay attention to the mix, pay attention to the sound design, pay attention to what works and what doesn't. And one of the things a lot of people forget is come up with a good melody. You know, don't get me wrong, I'm not the best at that in any way, shape or form, but I sort of try to experiment a bit, and again with my next EP, which I've started putting drafts together, I'm now trying to sort of play outside the scales as well. So yeah, it's got to be something interesting, and you know, it's easy to make a good production, but it's not so easy to make a good song, I guess is the point. So be aware of that. Vital Mistake. Hey Dom, I absolutely love your videos because of how real you are in them. Cheers. Producing music has been my passion for years, but I'm not the best at promoting or advertising my music. What would you recommend for an independent artist? Ooh, you're asking the wrong person. I'm rubbish at promoting my own stuff, really. Yeah, I mean, you know, the fact that I have a website for my studio and offer things like mixdown services, and I've never really mentioned it on my YouTube channel and never even mentioned the website, for example. You know, these are basic things I should be doing, but it is what it is. So what would you recommend for an independent artist? I would say if you're no good at promoting music, then find someone who is. That could be quite literally a promoter who is paid to promote certain things, or find a record label where their strengths are in that area. One of the reasons I love working with Mau5trap is the fact that they're very good, they're very structured, they put together decent plans for pushing a new release, and you know, those are the things that I'm not very good at, so it pays me to work with a label that does do those things. So yeah, I guess that's, you know, in terms of advertising music, it's a difficult thing to advertise these days. Let's face it, everyone's a producer, everyone's got their own thing to plug. You know, I've noticed personally that no one really posts SoundCloud links anymore. That used to be a big thing, but it gets to a point where everyone in the world is posting SoundCloud links on a daily basis. Nobody's got time to check them all, so you know, it just becomes pointless. So yeah, I don't really know the answer to that, but maybe we can talk more about it next week, because I'll have a think about that. Yeah, I mean, I kind of always think that, I kind of hope that my music advertises itself. I know that's not true, but I can't blame me for hoping. I'm sure there are things you can do to advertise. What those things are, I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, that's it. I've gone way over. I must be at like 45 minutes nearly now, so apologies for the long video. I hope everyone has a good weekend, and as usual, if you've got more questions, please keep them coming, because I'm loving this series. It's great, and I hope you guys are too. So leave a comment under this video, hit like, subscribe, blah blah blah. Yeah, and I'll see you next week. Cheers.